Welcome, friends. Thank you for joining my session. I believe that I'm the first one of the day, so I'm going to try to make it this super exciting. And at the end of the session, I hope that you'll be walking away with a few learnings on how to write better software when it comes to securing your .NET apps. So let's get started. For me, security is very important. And as you can see, I'm probably in the wrong profession, because if I were on the other side of the fence, then I would be a rich man. Because in this year, 2021, it is projected that cybercrime will cost or will have made $6.5 trillion worth of damage. That almost equates to about $4 million of damage per company around the world. And if we were to isolate that just in the US, that would be about $9 million per company worth of damage. Every cyber attack out there usually walks away with about 25,000 records of data, whether that's user accounts, whether that's database records that they're working out, but on average, 25,000 records make it out of every cyber attack. And that's quite scary, if you ask me. I love this line because hackers don't break in, they log in. And I don't know if you've been following the news, but every week or almost every week, one of the companies out there will fall victim to one of these attacks, and their user sign-in information will make it the news in one of these page dumps that eventually end up in Troy Hunt's website. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But the important bit is that hackers don't try to go after zero-day attacks anymore. They're not going to attack the operating system. They're not looking to find vulnerabilities in the browser. Mind you, they will still do that, but it's a lot of effort. It's a lot of work. Why spend so much time and effort when I can actually use somebody's credentials to log into a company's account? And these days, most of infrastructure is running on the cloud, so it's much easier to actually jump on a VM on the cloud and sign in as that user and do your damage. So as you can see, user information and credentials are more valuable to attackers than actually trying to attack infrastructure through other ways. But don't get comfortable there, because if you put something in the public domain, you can trust that it's going to be attacked and probed in many, many different ways. But attackers will always try to find the easy way, and we could make it easier for them, right? Convenience over security. So users tend to be lazy. I was lazy in the past as well. And if you ask my parents, and I suspect that other people out there, many of them will actually reuse their passwords. And not only will they use their passwords across different domains and different accounts, but they will also use easy passwords, like password, which is the most common password in the US, 123456 in Germany, and QWERTY in Russia. So security is hard. Absolutely. In fact, just this morning, I had a conversation on Twitter about encryption and how it should be done. And even though the person that wrote the blog post did a fantastic job there were bits that were insecure. MD5 was used for hashing stuff, right? So as you can see, getting security right is hard. So why are we making our lives harder when they shouldn't be? And as I said, companies are making the news every week. If you haven't been on Troy Hunt's website, it's called Have I Been Pwned? I would urge you to go and try it today. It's a fantastic website. Troy is doing a great job in collecting all these leaked data and putting it on a website where you can actually go and search by your email to see whether your email has ever made the news. And you can go and search today. You can put any email that you use out there for shopping or interacting with online services, just to see whether your accounts have ever been compromised. Ideally, you should be using password managers, and you should be rolling your keys and secrets every so often. But that's, again, too much work, right? So attackers don't spend too much effort in hacking systems because they can get all these credentials. Users don't make attackers' life harder by using unique and hard to break passwords. And you might say, well, what's the matter, right? If somebody hacks my Netflix account because they found my credentials, it's not the end of the world. They will just watch a few movies on my account. But as I said, people tend to reuse passwords. So the attackers will take those credentials and will try to numerous set of websites out there, Facebook, Twitter. They will try to take over your account, and then they will use that information to make money. Just in 2018, the FBI said that over $250 million were stolen through Facebook attacks, where somebody impersonated someone else, and then they claimed that there was an accident, and then they did money, and then friends and family rushed to them to help them out. And that money ended up in somebody else's account. So as you can see, it might seem very innocuous and very innocent to just have one password and some credentials stolen, but in the end, it's very valuable. In fact, it's valued between $30 and $50 in the black market. Credentials out there have a lot of value because, again, it will allow attackers to mount attacks and easily gain access to systems. And the problem is that, as I said, security is hard, and getting an identity system properly working, it's extremely hard. I've tried it myself in 2007 when I was working as a consultant for a company, and I thought, it's not hard. It's just a username and password. I can store it, I can encrypt it, I can hash it, I can make sure that nobody gets access. But then I started looking at all the different ways and permutations of attacks that are out there. Rainbow attacks and brute force attacks and password reset attacks. And oh my God, what started as a 3-day project took me months because I was always going back to tweak the system and make it more secure. And trust me, I don't think it was that secure in the end because I'm not a big company. I wasn't an identity service provider. So let's start with what should we be looking at as developers to at least create secure systems that won't leak our users' credentials. Let me skip that one because I've already done the introduction. Well, we could go down the route of Microsoft and totally make passwords redundant. I don't know if you've been following the news, but if you have a Microsoft account, an MSA account, then you can actually turn on passwordless today. That requires you to have another factor authentication, usually your phone, so Microsoft Authenticator would work. And then that means that every time I try to sign in with that Microsoft account, I get prompted on my phone to do the authentication there. And that means I don't have to remember my password, which is fantastic. Go and enable that today. But not every company, not every account, not every bank out there will allow you to do passwordless. In fact, it would be a dream if everybody could use a YubiKey, right? Which is a FIDO key, a hardware key that you carry with you to enable you to remove passwords and just sign in with this thing. And if you lose it, you have redundancies and what have you, but that would be ideal. And many of the identity providers out there are trying to allow you to do that. So instead of you having to roll out your own multi-factor authentication system, which it's hard, it's very hard, and integrating with FIDO is even harder if you try to do it yourself, then why not trust the experts, right? So I work for Microsoft Identity, so I'm a little bit biased on using Azure Active Directory as the identity service provider, but there are other systems out there. So if you are going to roll out your own authentication, please don't. Please use one of the services out there. And ideally, after watching my session, you'll use our services. If you are a .NET developer, it's actually quite easy because I will show you all the cool things that have been implemented over the past couple of years that I've been in the team anyway. But the whole point here is that something that is probably hidden by my transcript here is that Azure Active Directory performs 30 billion authentications a day. That's an insane amount of authentications that's happening. And you might say to me, Chris, our company doesn't even have 1,000 authentications. It's absolutely fine. We're focusing on the developer experience here. And you as a developer don't ever have to worry about scaling or creating a system that can handle 1 or 10 or 1,000 sign-ins concurrently and not falling over. So that is fantastic to begin with. Yeah, so this is what happens when your manager comes over and says, Mike, I want you to go and create a new website and I want our users to be able to sign in with their corporate credentials or maybe their social media logins and make it happen. And everybody goes, yeah, where do I start? Well, the good news is that you already have a system out there. If you're using Azure or Office, which most of the S&P 500 companies out there use, and most of the enterprises out there tend to use these days, and I hope you are using as well, then you're in luck, because those two subscriptions come with an Azure Active Directory out of the box. For users to be able to use Office, they need to be able to have an Azure Active Directory and be onboarded. And for people to use Azure, you have to have an Azure Active Directory to allow people to sign in and assign them roles. So if you're in that camp, then you're in luck, because you already have, your company already has an identity service for you. How easy it is to get started and adding authentication? I will show you that you can do it in 4 configuration settings and 1 line of code if you're using .NET, which is awesome. If you're using Node or Java or JavaScript, then it might be a few more lines of code, but trust me, it doesn't compare with anything when it comes to having to implement your own identity system. Does it support and integrate with my platform language and tools? Yeah, I mean, if you're using Visual Studio or Visual Studio Code or JetBrains or IntelliJ, then we do have the tools for you to be able to integrate directly from the ID without having to jump on the portal to do these things. And we also have tools to automate the process through Graph, so you can go and spin up all the configuration settings in Azure Active Directory through scripting, rather than having to do it through the portal. And finally, and this is the most important bit for me as a developer, does it support advanced security capabilities out of the box? So you don't have to build it. Multi-factor authentication, disaster recovery, self-service password resets, and conditional access, where you configure specific policies for your applications, are all provided to you for free. So as a developer, you don't have to write a single line of code. If your IT team wants to implement a conditional access that says only between the hours of 9 and 5, people can access the system, then that's all it takes. Your application will automatically inherit the settings. And there are more advanced capabilities coming, like continuous access evaluation and token binding, that will be provided to you for free out of the box. So how does this all work? What do you have to do? What kind of effort does it take to set everything up? Well, there are 2 components when it comes to working with identity and creating secure apps that require people to sign in. The first one is creating an app registration that shows your intent. You can do that through the portal, you can do it through Graph, you can automate the whole process. Whichever way you choose, then this is the first step. You need to go to Azure Active Directory and say, I'm going to use you to sign in users through my web app or my console app or my mobile app. Then you need to add some libraries. Now you can use the MSA library, the Microsoft Authentication library, which is available for most major languages out there, or you can go down the route, bring your own open source, OpenID compliant libraries. So as long as the libraries that you're using are OIDC compliant, then Azure Active Directory behind the scenes can support that. And that's the key there. We're not tying you into our own libraries, but if you use our own libraries, we make your life easier, especially for .NET. And in some cases, you might have to go back to Azure Active Directory to configure API access, because to be honest, it's very unlikely that you'll just create a single website. There might be a website and multiple APIs that you need to access. And those APIs might also need to access other APIs and what have you. So you need to have a complex system of acquiring ID and access tokens to pass around. And as I said, we support all types of identities. Now, there are two choices here, 2 main choices at the very high level. The top one is if you're using organizational accounts or school accounts, or your enterprise users need to sign in, then you're using Azure Active Directory for that. Azure Active Directory also supports MSA accounts. So if you want to create an app that interacts with users, OneDrive to look at their pictures, like a picture browser, then if they want to sign in with their MSA account, which they don't need to use a password anymore because it's passwordless, then you can also use Azure Active Directory for that. And then so this is all organizational line of business applications. But there's the other side of building apps, the apps that you sell to your customers, the apps that you put out there so your customers can come and buy stuff from you, the forum that you put for your friends that play Call of Duty, right? They want to sign in with their Gmail account or their Outlook account or their Hotmail account or Yahoo. Is Yahoo still alive? And then, or they might also want to bring their social media logins like Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and sign in with those accounts and not have to worry about anything. So in that case, you are going to be using Azure Active Directory B2C, the business to consumer or business to customer, whatever you want to call it. And that allows you to bring external identities into your system. And as I said, the scripting is probably hiding this, but the Microsoft Identity Platform is built on top of open standards like OpenID Connect and Aws Jwt or SAML if you are using older systems. But the whole point is that you don't have to worry about the integration with these, and it's not proprietary. Nothing is proprietary. And I think that was a lot of time of me talking, so time to switch to some demos. I know I said JavaScript over there, but it's a .NET conference, so let's do a .NET app. I'm using .NET 6, which is just around the corner for going GA. So the things that you see today are available to you today if you go download .NET 6. And we're going to create a brand new application, and we're going to create a web app, and then we're going to add authentication to that web app and see how easy it is. So I'm going to create a new directory here, like demo 3. There you go. I couldn't remember how many demo accounts I had over there. Clear, make some space. And then at the very top, I'm going to type the command. So .NET new web app. And then I've already have used this before. So IntelliSense is picking it up. So we're going to use single org. And then we don't need to give it a name because we're in the same directory. If I was at the higher level, I would just give it a name. So this one, in effect, is going to say, I'm going to create a web application that is going to use Azure Active Directory for authentication, which is what we wanted to do anyway. So we're going to open this in Visual Studio Code. You can use Visual Studio or any other .NET editor. And you want some changes. If you haven't used .NET 6 yet, then there are some changes. Maybe somebody else at the conference is talking about them today, or you can join .NET Conf in 2 weeks to find about all the cool things that is out there. But one of the big things is that we have a program.cs. There's no startup.cs. And you'll also notice that there's no namespaces. Everything is just in one level, top level. And you can also create global usings and what have you. But let's look at the identity component. So first and foremost, we have 2 libraries, the Microsoft Identity Web and Web UI. The first one is providing the middleware. The second one is providing the UI, is providing the sign in and sign out pages that you need in your application. You don't have to create these. So very lightweight. It's all built to the DLL. Then in the app settings, you notice that we have some settings over here that we'll need to configure very, very soon. We'll start with something that we already know, which is my Azure Active Directory, my test tenants for testing things like that and doing demos. So see Matskas on Microsoft.com. So 5 lines of settings and 1 line of code, 2 lines of code there. Well, okay, I can make it better because I did promise you it will be a 1 line of code, right? So let's change this to add Microsoft Web App Authentication. But I mistyped Microsoft, so this is complaining about it now. And that's not the right one. Don't add Microsoft Identity Web App Authentication. We had to make it long. And then here it needs to take the configuration. I am just going to go with the defaults. So builder.configuration. I don't need to add anything else. That's all I need, 1 line. And then there's a default authorization policy that says any incoming call needs to actually sign in. So you can't see the website unless you sign in. We can override that with anonymous attributes and properties. And then we need to add the lines 36, which is use authentication. So we have all the components that we need, but it's not going to run because obviously we haven't configured our Azure Active Directory. So let's go and do that. So here somewhere I have my Azure Active Directory. I have a test tenant. If you search for Microsoft 365 developer program, then you can sign up for a forever free Azure Active Directory P1 tenant, which gives you godlike rights. You're full admin on this one. You can do whatever you want. You're not stuck by your IT team. And we're going to create a new application. We're going to name it Demo 3. And then I'm going to register this. So now we have some basic components that we can take. So the client ID, let's go back to our code here. And let's add that to the client ID. And then for the tenant ID, back to the directory that we had. So back here, our tenant ID is down here. I'm going to add it to my settings. And then we're done with the code. Let's save it. If you don't save, then it's going to break. Let's save here as well, because I do that all the time. Visual Studio Code does actually have a setting to save on edit, but I tend not to use it for some reason. And then back here in our application, we need to say what kind of authentication we're going to be doing. We need to say what kind of platform or what kind of application we're building, right? So it is a web app. The redirect URI will be, I have no idea, because if you haven't used .NET 6, then one thing that you don't know is that it actually, .NET Run, it actually uses a random port now. So Kestrel doesn't run on the default 5001. So it will give me some random number, 7264, which is usually around that, that 72 something. Okay, so now that we know, let's stop this one. And then let's go back to our app registration. And then here we need to say, where are we expecting the authentication result to come back? Sign in, OIDC. In case you're wondering where this one came from, let me just click this one and save and configure. In case you're wondering where this sign in OIDC is coming from, it is configured in our codes. So if I go back here, you'll see sign in OIDC. As long as this too much, it's great, because we're saying the user is going to leave our application, go to sign into Azure Active Directory, and once they finish successfully signing in, they will be redirected back to the application with the tokens. If this redirect URI doesn't match the configuration settings, then it will break, because Azure Active Directory assumes that somebody is trying to hijack your tokens and send them somewhere else. So with that, we're ready to run it. So let's see what happens. .NET run. Dun, dun, dun. Will it run? Will it work? Will my midnight demo work? Let's find out. Okay, first good step is that we are being prompted to sign in. So I'm going to sign in with my sign-in user. I don't even have to pass my credentials. And because it is the first time that we're using this application, it's asking me to consent. This is the consent framework that Azure Active Directory offers you to ensure that both users are protected and the developer doesn't overdo it. So in this instance, I am asking for basic user. My application is asking for basic user information like my name, so I can display it on the application. It also asks for offline access if we need to get a refresh token. So I will say accept. And because I'm an admin, I can also consent for the whole company, so nobody else has to go through this form. So your admins may do that. And as you can see, it only took us 3 lines of code and 4 configuration settings to get the sign-in working. Obviously, it doesn't line up here well, but I suspect I have a very long name. I could display my name over there instead, and it would work out perfectly. So, and sign out works as well. And if I wanted to use different sign-in methods like a FIDO key, then I could also do that, although this account is not configured for it. So yeah, that was the first demo. So let's see what else do we have on the slides. So we did this one with a demo time. We do like for you to come as you are. I know that we love .NET. Everybody loves .NET. It is my favorite framework, and C# is my favorite language. I would choose it over anything else all the time. But I also like to play with Python and Node and Java and other languages like Go and Ruby. So what if I want to use authentication in those languages? Well, we expect you to come and use whatever tools you want to make your application secure. This slide is very controversial because, as you can see, the only thing Microsoft here is the identity component. Everything else is random tools and random services that other companies use. Many companies use multi-cloud. Many companies like to play with different languages, and we want to support all of them. Whether you're running on Kubernetes or bare metal, whether you're using serverless, or whether you are on PaaS or SaaS, we want to support you. So you can bring your own tools. In fact, we are just releasing the Azure Toolkit for IntelliJ with support for Azure Active Directory at the end of this month. We work with third-party teams to make it happen. We work with IntelliJ to make IntelliJ, and Rider also work with Azure Active Directory. So Rider today has an extension that allows you to work with Azure Active Directory out of the box when you create .NET apps. But if you are in the Microsoft ecosystem, we do provide you with some additional benefits, like integrating easier with graph data, being able to pull that information through Visual Studio Code, and GitHub. In fact, the GitHub story is going to become even better by supporting direct authentication through Azure Active Directory and getting tokens for automation tasks. And then if you're running on Azure, then you have an app service that calls a SQL server and what have you. Then there's a whole secretless setup that you can use through managed identities, where you say my front end is going to call a backend, and I don't want to pass credentials around. I just want this identity, which I have configured, to be able to access this data, maybe have read-only data or read-write data. You configure all that. And then there's no passwords. So we're eliminating another attack vector from our solution. And finally, Power Apps and the Power Platform is able to actually pull data from either custom APIs or Microsoft APIs and display and build applications on very quickly without having to write any code. So whichever camp you use, full developer, citizen developer, they all work with our data, and you get some additional benefits. We mentioned a little bit about B2C, and my next demo will actually bring a B2C example where we are using consumer accounts, right? I don't want to have my customers having to be part of my organization. It makes no sense, right? If I work at Contoso, I don't want my customers that come to buy stuff from Contoso to be, employees. Anybody should come and buy stuff. Like if I have to buy a shoes from Nike, I don't have to be a Nike employee. So for that scenario, we want to support any solutions you have. And that means that you can build very elaborate mobile apps, front-end apps like JavaScript and Node and what have you, and then call APIs in the backend, all secure with B2C as well. So B2C brings the consumer element into identity. So whichever apps you're building, then you can get what you want. And with B2C, you also get customization, which is very important, because if you are in a mobile application and suddenly you're redirected somewhere else, and that somewhere else looks very alien and strange, then many users may be taken aback and decide not to use the application because why am I being redirected here? Why am I leaving my app? Making the experience look consistent across all the pages and the federated identity, something else that is out there doing the identity for me, is very important. So your users feel at ease because there's a consistent UI, and you can also make the experience better for everyone else, and secure, because security is the important bit. We touched a little bit about some of these things that I talked already about. Single sign-on is also very important. You saw that I was already signed in my previous application. I didn't have to, when I was doing the demo, I didn't have to re-sign in with that same account. Single sign-on, it is supported. You can decide how single sign-on is implemented or whether you want to have single sign-on in your applications. Most enterprises and companies do want that. So you can have mobile single sign-on, you can have SAML integration, you can have OpenID Connect, and all of two protocols supported. Now let's switch to .NET. We already talked about .NET, but I didn't mention how we made the magic happen with one line of code. The major component, the biggest change that we brought was the Microsoft Identity.web library, which was released last September. So it's been almost a year and 2 months in production, and it's gone through various iterations, bringing more advanced features. But the nice thing about the Microsoft Identity.web is that it abstracts a lot of the complexities that are part of the protocol. And you don't really see much, right? If we go back to my code, you'll notice that there was literally nothing there. There was like one line of code to make identity work in the middleware. This is line 11. So if I were to, think like, oh, what do I have to do to make authentication work? This is all you have to do now. However, all the advanced capabilities that you would expect from the framework are still there. And if you're building with .NET Core, then anything that is .NET Core 3+1 and later can use Microsoft Identity.web. In fact, all our templates use it by default. gRPC, web apps, web APIs, Blazor WASM and Blazor Server, and .NET Core console apps, right? Although console apps do not use the Microsoft Identity.web because they're console. So that was my bad. MSAL. So if you can use the Microsoft Identity.web, if you're not in .NET Core, And if you're not in .NET, then you have to use the MSAL library, the Microsoft Authentication library, which is available for all major languages out there. And if you want support for one that we don't support right now, hit me up. I will tell our PMs. And finally, you don't have to use our libraries. You can use any OpenID Connect library. And as a matter of fact, I'm just working with the AWS team. They just released a new library called Aws Jwt Verify, which allows you to verify tokens in APIs. And since we don't have one from Microsoft, I said, why not use them there? I've used open source libraries before, but AWS has also created an open source library, and we work with them to make it work with Azure Active Directory. So any library works out there. AWS and Azure side by side. I'm going to skip these because actually this one is a good slide because people usually ask, where does Microsoft Identity.web sit? And why can I not see all the awesome things like hooking into OpenID Connect events and being able to do transformation on the fly? These are all still there. You can configure the UI. You can change tap into cookie authentication and JWT bearer authentication events. So all these are still there. We're just hitting them because we know that 95% of developers are not going to mess with these components. If you still have to do them, they're all there for you. And then I'm going to switch to a quick example where I'm going to use Blazor WebAssembly and an API using Azure Active Directory B2C to actually authenticate the user in the front end and then call something from the back end. And I will show you how authentication and authorization works across the board. And I have this solution already here. So let's open this up. So code. We're not going to build it right now because it will take a lot of time, but I can explain what it takes to actually implement this. So the API is a standard .NET API. So nothing really changes out of the box other than the fact that we're using Azure Active Directory B2C instead of, standard Azure. So I'm using a consumer account. And then in my program, so you'll notice that this is slightly older because we have a startup. In the startup, we have all the code here. Two major things. One is that we're using an API instead of a web app. And then you need to configure CORS. You don't want to be caught by CORS because I've been caught by CORS before and it's not a fun game to play. So cross-origin resource security is very important. So make sure you don't forget about that. This, in effect, I mean, I've opened everything here, but at least there's CORS configured. You should be locking things down. For example, if you are expecting only your single page app or your front-end app to call your API, then that should be the only IP address that you allow. But anyway, we have the API configured, and then we have a controller, and that controller you'll see here. It does two things. The first one is using an authorize, so it expects the incoming API call to have a token attached to it, an access token, and the pipeline will validate that the token is still right, it hasn't expired, it came from the right authority. And then inside our code, we're looking at not only just for a secure call to come in, but also for the sign-in user to have the right scopes, the right permissions to access the API. So you notice here I have access as user 2. I'll tell you in a second why when we do the demo. But in effect, I'm looking for this claim in my token. If that claim is not there, then it's going to throw a 403. So let's run it and see what happens. So this is our API. So this is a .NET 6 API. It's using .NET 6. Well, no, this is a .NET 5 branch. I haven't upgraded that to .NET 6 yet, but it will happen once it goes live. So go ahead and run. And obviously .end doesn't exist. So go ahead and run. Just thinking about it. Cool, that's running. And then we have the client. Let's see what the client does. So code, so very, very quickly in code and see how this works. So notice that Blazor is different. Blazor, especially Blazor WebAssembly is different because it's a single page application. It needs to load many things up front. So the authentication bit is customized for Blazor. It doesn't use the Microsoft Identity.web out of the box. No, I don't want you. I don't want you. So here you'll notice that we have the API scope, and then we add the authentication component down here. Slightly different to Microsoft Authenticate Web. And because it's all JavaScript, there's an interop magic that happens. Again, you don't have to worry about that. It will be done for you. You know, what we say here is we want to authenticate the user, and we also want to require an access token with a specific scope. That scope is our API scope. So with that, we also have a custom authorization that in effect passes that token to any outgoing request. So every time we call the API, instead of having to go grab the token from the cache and pass it on, it does it for us. And then some pages that there's an authentication page and what have you. But let's run the application and see what happens. I know Blazor is super hot these days, so I chose to do this demo here because I know most people like it. So it opens somewhere. There you go. Open here. First, I need to sign in because I haven't signed into my test tenants. And you'll notice I'm using my Outlook account. I hope I remember my passwords. I do. So we're signed in, right? Everything's working great. Now I'm going to fetch my data from my API. And this failed. Oops. The yellow bar of death in Blazor. So we can actually do an F12 on this one. I don't want to see the welcome page. I want to see what the error message is. And we'll notice that we got a 403 error. It means that our API got the right access token, but it didn't have the right permissions. So the scope that we acquire is access as user, but the API expects access as user too, which I explicitly broke. So I can show you what would happen if the permissions were not passed correctly. So I stopped that one, and we can now go back and restart the API. And we will do another call to that API and see what happens. So the API is up and running. We'll return back to our application. Too many tabs open. I'm going to close this one because I'm really confident, and then we're going to fetch our data. And lo and behold, we can close that message down. So that all works. Everything's secure with Azure Active Directory B2C end-to-end, which is great. And it doesn't take many lines of code. I think Blazor is slightly different, but again, it's all in the template and it all works out of the box. All you have to do is just pass the configuration settings to all the different components in your apps, APIs, apps, and then have it run. Let's see what else we have on our slides. Couple more slides very, very quickly, just to show you two more components. And I know we have 5 more minutes. So one of the big things that we tend to work a lot, especially if you're in the Microsoft ecosystem or if your company is using SharePoint or OneDrive and what have you, is the ability to tap into this data easily. And Microsoft has done a fantastic job creating that one API to rule them all, the Graph API. And it's great because Graph is allowing us to create rich experiences and interact with a lot of different systems without writing a lot of code. So I don't know if you ever had to work with OneDrive or SkyDrive. It used to be called SkyDrive many, many years ago when I didn't have gray hair. And actually interacting with OneDrive, where you had to download their custom SDK. You had to actually sign in using their SDKs and buttons. So it was very, very hard. And this is now less than 3 lines of code when it comes to Graph. I remember doing it for a mobile app, and it was a pain in the backside because you sign in the user, and then the OneDrive library has no knowledge of that user. So you have to sign in the user again, which is awful. Now the user signs in, and now that we have access to all their data in the organization. The best example I can give you for how Graph is so cool is every time you go and type an email in Outlook, if you are using Exchange, then you'll know that as you start typing, it comes up with suggestions about who you should send the email. And it's not random suggestions. It actually looks at your data and says, these are the 10 most useful people to you, or the 10 most common people that you communicate with. So we'll try to put them at the top. And in fact, it will always bring at the top the the most used email address. So Graph is doing a fantastic job there. It calls the people API and grabs the data for you. So if you haven't used Graph before, then it's a fantastic tool to bring everything under one API. And I will quickly switch into a demo. Here, if you go to ak.ms, G Graph Explorer, then it opens a GUI that you can interact with Graph the way you like. So actually sign me in as well. So you don't have to sign in. You don't have to use an account. It will actually give you some dummy data. But if I were to find information about me, this is what Azure Active Directory pulls when it tries to sign me in. Remember that email address that was displayed in the app? That's the one. And then if I were to say people, it's me, people. Yeah. Then it runs the query for you. But the coolest bit about the Graph Explorer is that it actually gives you the code. So if your boss comes and says, hey, build me something that pulls data from SharePoint, you're like, I don't know how to do that. Or, you come here, you work it out, and then you grab the code and you paste it into your code and job done. So you can say, oh, it's going to take me a week, and then it takes a day, and then you can chill for the rest 4 days of the week, which is great. So Graph Explorer is the one API to rule them all. And once you authenticate your users with Azure Active Directory, you have unlimited access to their the graph data. There you have it. I think that takes me to the end of my presentation. And I know we're asked through some stuff. I wish we had more time to spend and explain how things work and why this would be in such a way. But the one thing I want you to take from here is please do not roll your own identity when you should be using somebody else's service. If you are using .NET, then Azure Active Directory makes it super easy because our libraries are doing most of the heavy lifting for you, but everything is open source and everything is OpenID, C, and Aws Jwt compliant. And if you have any questions, you can reach out directly to me. You can hit my email, you can hit me on Twitter, or you can even find me on TikTok. We love educating developers and helping developers be more successful. Thank you. And that's me. 45 minutes on the dot.